Hi again, Len Rydell, and now I'd like to talk to you and introduce the third lecture that we did on the fighting on the second day at Gettysburg, the symposium portion of it in June of 1997. Our next speaker, Dr. Richard Sauers, is probably one of the most understated and soft-spoken men you would ever meet in your life. And it's interesting because his writings far exceed the gentle demeanor that he presents himself at. And Dick I lost track of him 20 some odd years ago. He was working, I think, in Eastern North Carolina and doing some work on Burnside and so forth. But at the time I met him, he had written a book that I'm not sure whether it was his doctoral dissertation or not. It was called A Caspian Sea of Red Ink. And what it was he had examined the controversy that arose from the conflict between Daniel Sickles, a corps commander under Meade, and George Gordon Meade, the Army commander. And the roots of this had gone back to Chancellorsville when both were corps commanders. Meade had the first corps, Sickles had the third corps, and it has a lot to do with ground positioning and so forth. But what was interesting about this particular presentation was it was one of the big controversies, if not the biggest controversy on the Union side, made worse by the fact that Sickles was vastly more deft with the use of the pen and his tongue than was George Gordon Meade. Meade had been born in Cadiz, Spain. He was an American, but had not been born in the country. He was from Pennsylvania, and he was one of the Brahmian types of old blood Americans in the Philadelphia area. And a West Point graduate, whereas Dan Sickles was a Tammany Hall politician in the New York boroughs and very well versed in the politics of New York and its largest city. And as a result, because he was such a good politician, he had in fact become the congressman from the New York City area, and had been a man who had been involved in scandal when he was in D.C. He shot dead the son of Francis Scott Key, Barton Keyes, who Keyes was having an affair with his young wife, Teresa Bagnoli. And so Sickles was quite a character, and he continues to be a character after the war. He becomes one of the commissioners that is responsible for the establishment of the the Gettysburg National Military Park. While he doesn't have a monument on the field, when asked if it bothered him, he said, "Hell, the whole damn battlefield is my monument." But he's a guy who's a brave man. In this fighting on the second day, he will be struck by a cannonball and will be taken from the field. Will have his leg amputated, and will find that he has to be carried, even before the Battle of Gettysburg is over, he's carried back to D.C. to begin convalescence, where he finds himself in proximity to Abraham Lincoln, and therein begins the genesis of the scandal between them. Richard wrote this book. It's not a real thick book, and again, its title is A Caspian Sea of Red Ink. I think it's Butternut and Blue Press or something. It certainly was a subject worthy of more than a secondary or a vanity type press. And Richard, who was getting his doctorate at the time, certainly filled in in a significant way that controversy by examining the antecedents of it, how it evolved, how it was argued out, and how ultimately it played out throughout the rest of Meade's and Sickles' life. So I thought that this would be one of the neatest things to talk about and juxtapose it against Lee's problems with Longstreet and his corps commanders, who were balky about continuing the fight after the first day at Gettysburg. They didn't necessarily want to continue fighting in and around Gettysburg. So this easily overlooked because it didn't have major study at the time. I had read the book that Dick did, and I thought it was worthy of presentation. And so I hope you enjoy it as Dr. Richard Sauers presents Two Commanders, Two Conflicts, and deals with the Sickles-Meade controversy.
I recommend books very often, but one of the best, 2 or 3 best books I've read in the last 3 years is Richard's book on the Burnside expedition. So I very seldom ever endorse a book in a group, but I would recommend that highly as one of the 2 or 3 best books I've read in the last 3 years.
And coming from that, I'm really flattered that it's a highly good book. Just one aside here before I get started. You're just talking about Strong Vincent. And if you decide to go up to Erie, visit his grave, during the cemetery, you might want to check on another unsung American hero who's buried there. I just learned this about a month and a half ago. Captain Charles Vernon Gridley is buried there. There's ashes in there, and you all know who Captain Gridley was. Even if I won't yeah, he was a Michigan boy, but he married, from what I can understand, one of Oliver Wilcox Nortons in his family, and Battle of Gettysburg, he was deathly sick and asked Dewey if he could command his flagship in battle, and Dewey said sure. About a month later, he died. He was cremated in Japan and brought back to Erie and buried, and he's buried up there. And the reason I know this is I'm working on a 100th anniversary commemorative line to get some later on the state participation in the Spanish American War. And just by way of another slide, I am now the curator of Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Pittsburgh. I don't know if any of you have heard of the hall. It was a cooperative effort of all the GAR halls in Pennsylvania, in Allegheny County. It opened in 1910, and it's been filled with military artifacts dating from before the Civil War through the Desert Storm, and none of the stuff has ever been cataloged. So I'm going to be kept busy for probably the rest of my life, going through the fine collections. If anybody's interested in GIR work, when all the different posts in the area closed, they donated all the records to the hall. And I saw these about 2 weeks ago when I was roaming around the building, taking up a whole wall in one of the storage rooms are all the post-record books from the GAR, Union Veteran Legion, the Spanish American War Veterans, and a whole number of other area units from World War I and World War II. It's an amazing collection, not just of paper, but also photographs of hundreds of uniforms and weapons, and we probably have 200 or 300 flags of different wars, including a lot of GAR. But the main reason I'm here is I want to talk about the 2 major controversies at Gettysburg, and as you all know, I don't think there's any other battle in American or world history that's as contentious as Gettysburg was. It's even rarer that you would find horrific squabbles between the general officers on both sides of the battlefield. And because of all this contentious and libelous and slanderous literature that it has produced, I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what went on the battlefield. But the 2 major controversies, of course, are the Lee Longstreet controversy on the Confederate side and the Meade Sickles feud on the Union side. And as Len said, one of my first books, which was my master's thesis at Penn State under Warren Hassler, was studying the Meade Sickles controversy, examining the literature, how it went, who said what, when, and in what context, and how historians have interpreted it over the years. And I'm currently at work. I don't plan to have it done for probably 2 or 3 years yet. I'm working on a similar volume, similar historiographical approach to the Confederate side, trying to make sense of all this. And of course, as you know, we probably talked about yesterday, and you went out with Ed and saw the Confederate flag march and what happened and everything. The controversy really didn't begin until 1872. Of course, when did Robert E. Lee die? 1870. So pretty much we 1872, Jubal Early gave an address on January 19th, Lee's birthday, at Washington University. And he made some disparaging remarks about why the Confederacy lost at Gettysburg. But from what I can discern, the Early's talk didn't receive a lot of widespread publicity. But then the next year, on January 19th, 1873, William Nelson Pendleton delivered the Lee Memorial Address at Washington and Lee. And he rambled on, and he said the following thing. And he's talking here about late on July 1st. The ground farther south of the place was then carefully examined by myself, and being found encouragingly less difficult than the steep ascent fronted by our troops already up in the Culps and Cemetery Hills, its practicable character was about 9 p.m. reported to our commanding general. He, with accustomed attention, received the report and remarked that, already aware of the main facts, he had ordered General Longstreet to attack on that front at sunrise the next morning. And this became the basis of the famous sunrise attack order. Pendleton, in conjunction with Jubal Early and several other officers, thereafter maintained that General Lee had ordered, late on July 1st, General Longstreet to break his two divisions, McLaws and Hood, and attack the Union left flank at sunrise on July 2nd. And, of course, that really began the controversy, but the controversy was further inflamed in the 1870s by the Count of Paris, who, as we all know, wrote one of the better general histories as far as he got before he was exiled from France, on the history of the Civil War in the United States. And about this time, he was working on the Gettysburg campaign. And he wrote a letter to J. William Jones, the Secretary of the Southern Historical Society, and said, I'm really confused about what happened at the battle because of conflicting reports, the lack of anything that I can find to interpret what happened on the Confederate side. And so he said, could you insert a letter that I sent you and leave my name out of it because I would like the replies to be impartial. And he wrote and said, I would like you to ask your fellow veterans, why did the South lose at Gettysburg? And so Jones published this in the Southern Historical Society papers, and for about the next dozen years or thereabouts, a lot of the major early literature on why the Confederacy lost at Gettysburg was published. William Allen contributed, Jubal Early, Jones himself wrote one or two articles, Fitzhugh Lee, Longstreet added some material, Walter Taylor, Henry Heath, Cadmus Wilcox, Lafayette McLaws, a number of other officers contributed, and it raged with this vituperative literature for a number of years. And then in 1877, the Philadelphia Weekly Times, which was Republican editor A.K. McClure's newspaper, began a series called Annals of the War, in which he went out to both northern and southern veterans, mostly general officers at the beginning, and asked them to write accounts of the operations they had participated in. He wanted to publish a series of articles in his newspaper. He had the Philadelphia Times. He started the Philadelphia Weekly Times, basically built around the subscriptions for people who wanted to read about the Civil War from the eyes of from the pens of the people who had fought it. And from 1877 through about 1878, a number of the early articles featured Gettysburg. James Longstreet wrote some of his first articles on Gettysburg that were published in the paper and enraged Confederate officers like Early and other admirers of Lee because Longstreet basically said Lee had agreed with him before the campaign that it would be a strategic offensive and a tactical defensive. Move into the north, take a nice defensive position, force the Union Army to attack because he said occasionally when we attack we get repulsed, but when the Yankees have always attacked us, we've always repulsed them badly. So he said, let's take up a defensive position and make the Yankees attack. They agreed with him. And then Longstreet had the temerity and the audacity to say that Lee lost his senses at Gettysburg and had his ardor up because of the victory on the first day to keep attacking and trying to defeat the Yankee Army and drive it off the battlefield. Lee said, or Longstreet said this was a bad mistake, and he said in a kind of roundabout way it was Lee's fault that the battle was lost. that didn't make Longstreet very happy, very endeared to his Southern patriots. Of course, Longstreet had turned Republican after the war in hard times to try to, he went to the Grant administration to get a job. He had become Catholic, which did not endear him to the Presbyterians and Episcopals who formed the bulk of Lee's officers. And so because of Longstreet's personal life and his audacity to attack his former commanding general, it set off a storm of controversy across the South. If you look at newspapers today, when they report on what's going on in the Philadelphia papers, what's going on in Richmond with the Southern Historical Society papers and other papers, an amazing amount of vituperative literature was unleashed against Longstreet. And then in the middle 1880s, the Century magazine began its Battles of Leaders series, and Longstreet contributed a couple of articles to that formidable body of literature. And unfortunately, Longstreet changed his tune a couple of times, which didn't endear him again. If you look at his early writings in the Philadelphia Weekly Times, then compare what he said, or what was excerpted from papers that he said in the Southern Historical Society papers, and then look at the Century magazine articles that were later published as Battles of Leaders, the general story is the same, the details are a little bit different. And historians have wondered why did Longstreet keep changing his mind. Douglas Southall Freeman insinuated that maybe Longstreet was covering up some of the facts, he was changing the facts to suit the way he wanted to tell history, but there's actually a simple explanation for all of this. In 1886, Longstreet wrote to Oswald Latrobe, who was one of the staff officers, and he basically said he wrote his articles from memory. He didn't have any material to go with. He says, in the autumn of 1865, General Lee wrote me for all of the papers, books, and orders that I had to aid him in writing his account of his campaign. And basically, Lee had, and I've seen this on a number of occasions, and we don't know whatever happened to the manuscript, but Lee had started to write his memoir. And of course, it didn't finish. Forgot. I bundled up everything and sent him. I have since his death heard that Colonel Marshall of Baltimore has charge of all of these papers, with all of General Lee's other papers, as well as his narrative, as far as he got it in it before his death. I have written Colonel Marshall several times about my papers and asked copies of the originals, and he kindly sent me on one occasion copies of a number of letters and other dispatches, but not of the class most important and useful to me. If you can find opportunity, I will be glad of your assistance in this matter also. The confidential letter book and replies of General Lee will be most valuable if I can only recover it in the papers you had with it. I have written Cullen to look it up if possible. If it was turned over to Alexander, it's probably in Richmond. If it was not, Custis Lee turned it over to Marshall, who has it in Baltimore. And you may find it there with all the papers now so important to me. Then he says the following. One's memory at best should not be relied upon in writing for the historian of the future. And I am sure that there was too much even after General Lee joined us for me to attempt at this late date to pick up items from memory. And this is why Longstreet changed his mind on several occasions. Why, when he was asked to write articles, he had sent all of his personal papers and everything to other officers, and he was left to write everything from memory. And so, I can't even remember what the heck I was doing last week. You imagine Longstreet trying to think of exactly what happened on a particular battlefield 20 years before, with all the battles they were involved in. And so basically, this is the original thrust of the Lee Longstreet controversy. Longstreet saying that Lee should listen to me and take him defensive instead of attacking him. And Jubal Early, along a few other officers, saying that Longstreet disobeyed orders. He was supposed to attack at sunrise on July 2nd, instead of dawdling until 4 p.m. when it was too late. The whole Union Army was on the field. And so this is what the controversy is basically left at that. And historians since then have tried to dig through the mess and have taken one side or the other to see who was right. And of course, Freeman and a lot of the other Virginia historians took Robert E. Lee's side. Other people have taken Longstreet's side, while a number of historians have tried to cut through it, look at it from both sides, and find that 1863. Lee was blessed with some of the worst luck he ever had during the Civil War. The Army had just been reorganized after Chancellorsville. There were a number of new officers in new positions. They weren't used to commanding such large bodies of troops. And one of the faults I can find with Lee as a field commander is he never developed an effective staff. And Gettysburg battlefield and what happened and what didn't happen on the battlefield is a perfect example of why an Army commander needs to have an effective staff who knows what's going on and be able to communicate effectively with his subordinates to move troops along. And I'll answer some questions about this later because I've only got 45 minutes to make sense of all this. Of course, on the other side is Generals Meade and Sickles. And basically what it boils down to is on July 2nd, Meade and his supporters claimed that the general ordered Dan Sickles to take the 3rd Army Corps, anchor his right flank in General Hancock's left on Cemetery Ridge, and extend his left flank down and anchor on Little Round Top. Sickles claims that he never received orders on July 2nd, and therefore, through a number of things, if you look at what Sickles said. Sickles said he claimed 4 different things. One, that his scouts found Longstreet's flanking march, and because he had no orders from headquarters and he didn't like the ground he occupied, he took it upon his own responsibility to move his 3rd Corps all the way out to the Peach Orchard line, form that famous V-shaped salient, and then get slammed by the Confederates, break the shock of their attack, and save Little Round Top. This is what Dan Sickles claims. He claims that he knew what was happening on the Confederate side. He claims that Colonel Hiram Berdan with the 1st U.S. Sharpshooters with 4 companies plus the 3rd Maine Infantry as support was sent out into the woods on the Seminary Ridge to reconnoiter. They ran into a Confederate force in Pitcher's Woods, stopped them for 40 minutes, and therefore enabled Sickles to take up this advanced position and hold the Confederate army and save Little Round Top. And Sickles claimed this on a number of occasions after the war. Of course, Meade also died early. He died in 1872. Dan Sickles survived until, I believe, 1914, when he finally died. He outlived most of the other officers who had fought at Gettysburg, and by using a combination of the truth, half-truth, and outright lies, Sickles, time and time again, kept hitting the public over the head and telling the veterans what they wanted to hear. And one of the things that they wanted to hear is that Colonel Berdan's reconnaissance out in the Pitcher's Woods stopped Longstreet's flanking march. And a number of early historians repeated this myth, and as you all know, it's a myth because what he hit was 3 regiments of Cadmus Wilcox's Alabama Brigade, which was Richard Anderson's division of Hill's 3rd Corps, wasn't even part of Longstreet's command. But you keep in mind, when the early historians of Gettysburg were writing, the official records have not been published yet. And on a number of occasions, Sickles used official reports to quote from, and he received numerous reprimands from the War Department on occasion when he would quote the report. He would get these letters saying, look, we're in the process of compiling and editing and writing the reports. We don't want you quoting in public until reports are published. And the Gettysburg reports came out in the late 1880s. And so before that time, historians who were writing like William Stanton and other people who were writing about Gettysburg had to rely on whatever reports could be privately siphoned to them by federal officers. For example, when Samuel Bates was writing his book in Chancellorsville, he became friends with Joe Hooker, and Hooker used his influence in the War Department to obtain a number of reports, key officers about Chancellorsville that Bates had used. And so people like Sickles were left to try to beg reports to get reports. Of course, Dan never wrote a report on Gettysburg. So a lot of the early historians were wrong. Anderson's division was part of Longstreet's Corps up through Chancellorsville. And it's a mistake that easily would have been made in an era before you had all these published books with the complete orders of battle that you could refer to. But in any case, Wilcox's first 3 Alabama regiments were the only ones engaged, so Longstreet was nowhere close to that part of the battlefield when the skirmish took place, probably sometime around noon on July 2nd. Sickles also claimed that he never received any orders. In fact, he bragged about it in a number of his speeches. For example, in the early 1880s, he made an account in 1886, he made a lengthy speech to the reunion of the Third Army Corps in Boston that year, and he said the following. Now, I know it is said that General Sickles was impudent in engaging General Longstreet in battle when he had but one corps at his disposal. That is true. I acknowledge the truth of that criticism. It may have been impudent to advance and hold Longstreet at whatever sacrifice, but was it not a sacrifice to save the key of the position? What were we there for? The fight. Were we there to count the cost in blood and men when the key of the position at Gettysburg was within the enemy's grasp? Comrades, what little I know of war, I learned under good soldiers. What little I know of conduct on the field of battle, I learned from Hooker and Kearney. What would Hooker or Kearney have done? Finding himself in an assailable, untenable position, without orders from headquarters as to his dispositions for battle, when he saw the masses of the enemy marching to seize a point vital to the integrity of the Union position. Would those men have hesitated? Would they have sent couriers to headquarters asking instructions what to do? Well, I learned war from them. And I didn't send any either. I simply advanced out onto the battlefield and seized Longstreet by the throat and held him. Can you believe this? Here's the commander of the Third Corps actually claiming to his fellow admiring veterans that, I disobeyed orders. I marched my men out without sending couriers to headquarters. And it happened on a number of occasions. And unfortunately, when you go to the official records, you read the report of General David Birney, who's commanding the 1st Division of the 3rd Corps. He says the following. At 7 a.m., under orders from Major General Sickles, I relieved Gary's division to form the line, resting its left on the Sugarloaf Mountain, Little Round Top, and the right thrown in a direct line toward the cemetery, connecting on the right with the 2nd Division of this Corps. So here's the second in command of the 3rd Army Corps, saying that reporting to relieve Gary's division. And of course, you read what happened on the field. General Gary on the night of July 1st had occupied Cemetery Ridge just immediately to the north of Little Round Top. Green New York Brigade bivouacking about where the area of the New Jersey Brigade line from the 6th Corps is, sent a couple of regiments, Pennsylvania and Ohio Regiment, to the summit of Little Round Top, and he established a skirmish line basically along Couch Ridge up in the Wheatville area, And Gary was ordered before dawn to get his men moving, get them up the Tonytown Road, across the battlefield to Culp's Hill to join Slocum and the rest of the 12th. And Gary later complained to me after the war that, I waited, I sent couriers to Sickles, and here I am. I need to go. I have orders, I have to go. And Gary probably knew that just to the south of Big Round Top that night is Hancock and the entire 2nd Corps bivouac. And so in order to facilitate movements on the battlefield, Gary had to get his men moving and clear the road because shortly after he leaves, the 2nd Corps was marching up the Tonytown Road corridor to the battlefield. And Gary said, Sickles said, I'll attend to it in due time. And Gary finally says, I finally got disgusted with waiting and packed my men up and moved. And then Sickles claimed that later after the war because Gary had moved off without waiting for his men to be relieved, he couldn't find where the troops were bivouacked. And anybody who's been in the Army and who knows anything about Civil War military camps, when a division of 3,500 men picks up and moves, they're going to leave signs behind where they were. It should be fairly easy to figure out. By sending some couriers out looking around to see where the campfires were, or see where the fence rails were going, where everybody was packed down in the night, where the fields all flat. But Sickles was pretty hard. But he finally did basically obey Meade's order, and at some point early in the morning, July 2nd, the 3rd Corps was in about the position where Meade wanted to be. But then Sickles would claim that he didn't like his position, and he claimed this to the Committee on the Conduct of the War in 1864 and a number of other places throughout in his thoughts. He claimed that, he would claim that, I did take position, but it really wasn't a military position because there was higher ground to the front of me, I didn't have enough troops to occupy Little Round Top, and I was afraid of being attacked by the Confederates. And Meade and his supporters would claim that, well, yeah, you're on the battlefield, any general can expect to be attacked, so you have to be prepared. So it doesn't matter what your position is, you make the best of it, and you try to stay in a compact battle line. But Sickles would claim on numerous occasions that he was in swampy lowland, and the peach orchard line along Gettysburg Road was a much better position. And he used General Henry Hunt's testimonial accounts. Hunt, Meade's chief of artillery, at some point in the morning, later in the morning of July 2nd, Sickles does show up at Meade's headquarters at the Western House and complains about his position. And he wants to know where to go. And according to the eyewitness accounts of Meade's staff officers, Meade turns around and says, you know, there's the hills to the south. I want you to anchor your left flank there and anchor your right flank on Hancock's left. And so Sickles said, well, do I have permission to juggle my line, you know, according to the terrain? And Meade said, yes. You know, you're part of the battlefield. You arrange your troops as you see fit. And Sickles keeps whining his commanding officer, and so Meade finally says, he turns to General Hunt and says, go with Sickles and see what he wants about commanding artillery positions, and then report back to him. And Sickles takes Hunt out to the Gettysburg Road under cover of his skirmish line and shows Hunt, you know, you can put our cannons up here and the better ground. And Hunt agrees with Sickles, yeah, this is a good position if the general's contemplating an offensive. And Sickles asked, well, what should I do? And Hunt said, well, just stay where you are on the battlefield, and I'll report to the general and he'll be back in touch with you. And then Hunt writes in his Battles and Leaders series later that he left Sickles and then rode straight back probably along the Wheatfield Road to Cemetery Ridge, and realizes as he's riding back this way, instead of angling out where Humphreys' division later would be, when he approached the Peach Orchard that way, he realized how much farther out in front of the main Union line that this advanced position is, and something gets garbled up, and Hunt apparently never really gave yes or no report to General Meade. He heard some cannonading taking place in the Polk Hill area, and Hunt rode off to see what was happening over there, and apparently never passed along his recommendations to General Meade. And so Sickles would excerpt favorable testimony from other officers and edit out the unfavorable testimony. In 1886, during some of the big reunions on the Gettysburg battlefield, Sickles made a major speech again to the Third Army Corps Union and quoted a whole number of different officers and things, quoted from reports, did this. And the only problem is, and it took up 4 full pages in the National Tribune at the time when they reported what Sickles said. And if you're not really paying attention, you think, wow, this is great research material. Until you go back and you try to find the sources of Dan Sickles' quotes, then you'll find out you either can't find the original, or you find out that Dan has moved sentences and whole paragraphs around to make it show up the way he wants, and not as it's printed somewhere else in the original. But General Andrew Humphreys, who was later Meade's chief of staff, also had something to say about Gettysburg. In 1869, Humphreys had gone back to Gettysburg and walked over the ground of the Third Corps fight on July 2nd and wrote some memos. He said, after looking at both lines and thinking about things, he thought that the original line where the Third Corps was supposed to stay was probably the best of the 2 lines. He also said the Peach Orchard salient was just a horrific line to occupy, and that Sickles was wrong. The line was overextended, and it was too far from the main line to be supported properly. And then finally, Sickles would say something to the Committee to Conduct the War about something which he had no direct interest or no direct knowledge. He would claim that on the afternoon of July 2nd, General Meade was thinking about retreating from Gettysburg. And he brought in his pal Dan Butterfield, who was then commanding a division under Hooker in the 20th Corps out near Chattanooga. He suggested to the Committee in the Conduct of the War that Butterfield could give some really great testimony about Union operations in Gettysburg. And the committee asked Secretary of War Stanton to attach Meade, he had received an order from Meade to write up an order for the Army to retreat from Gettysburg. And as it turns out, the way he talked about things, John Gibbon claimed to have seen the order and said all it was a preparatory order because Meade was unsure of what the Army of Northern Virginia was going to do, and therefore he wanted Butterfield to have scouts examine all the roads to the rear and prepare a retreat order in case the Confederates leave the battlefield and try to outmaneuver Meade, get between the Army and Washington or Baltimore. Meade wants to be ready to pull back real quickly to stand by the Confederates, which is, by military point of view, it's a logical process. But Butterfield and Sickles twist this into Meade planned retreat. And then Butterfield said, Meade was talked into staying by the attack on the 3rd Corps. And then Butterfield said, with a council of war on the night of July 2nd, the officers talked Meade into staying and fighting one more day and Meade wanted to retreat. And they made Meade look like a wimp who was ready to leave the battlefield. And in reality, it happened. But the whole controversy is kind of strange. Henry Hunt, who wrote a wonderful series on the first, second, and third days of Gettysburg for the Century magazine, said the following to the editors of the magazine as he was writing his article. He said, in fact, the controversy is queer. With Sickles' friends, it is which was the best line to adopt. The real one is, was Sickles justified in departing from his instructions if he understood them? But with all of this, I'll leave you with one final comment here before I ask for questions. Samuel P. Bates, the state-appointed historian who compiled Bates' History of Pennsylvania Volunteers, began working on some other books while he was working for the state. Bates' project was torpedoed before it was ever finished because of anti-Republican feeling in the Pennsylvania state legislature. Bates was kind of let go from his position before he finished the index and a couple of other preparatory volumes detailing Pennsylvania's participation in the war. But after Bates left state employment, he wrote most of his other stuff. Anyhow, he wrote Marshal Deeds of Pennsylvania, which was kind of a catch-all of information he had compiled about officers in Pennsylvania. And about half the book is a detailed history of the Battle of Gettysburg. And the book was later published in 1875. It was published by the Philadelphia Company of Davis and Company. Published the Gettysburg stuff was excerpted, some appendices were added, Bates revised it slightly, and published it as the Battle of Gettysburg. And then apparently the Davis Company sent out review copies to surviving officers of the Battle of Gettysburg and asked what their comments were on the book. And basically what Bates did is he took Sickles' side and denigrated the conduct and character of General Meade. And Gouverneur Warren, Meade's chief engineer, was one of the officers who was sent a copy of this book. And he asked, the Davis Company asked for his comments. And Warren let loose. He sent the Davis Company a one-page letter and said, you used sources, what he titled unprincipled detractors, to attack General Meade's character and denigrate the performance of the Army of Gettysburg. And the Davis and Company apparently sent a letter to Bates. And Bates sent a letter to Warren and said, how could you do this? I was trying to be fair about things. How could you say this? And then in October 15, 1875, Warren, who was then in Newport, Rhode Island, told Bates exactly what he thought about Bates' book. And I'm going to read the letter here because it's a letter I found since I had written asking to see it. When I eventually do a second edition, it's one of the diaries I'll incorporate into it. It's one of the more fascinating Civil War letters I've ever read. Dear Sir, I have received your letter of the 9th and relative to mine of September 13th to the Messrs. Davis. When I received their request for my opinions of the account of the Battle of Gettysburg, I sat down and wrote some dozen pages illustrative of my idea of the morale of the Army and General Meade's relations to it as I felt them at the period of the battle. General Meade's moral character was a tower of strength to us and gave hope to the hearts of those who sought the favor of Providence and believed in the success of a just cause. I found I was making quite an article on this point, which is only one of the claims of General Meade, to our gratitude for his successful leadership. I do not know of another man who could so thoroughly have inspired the Army of the Potomac to meet with confidence the great trial it was about to make, on which the success of our cause so largely depended. The country felt all this for a few brief hours, but General Meade was soon assailed by unwarranted detractions. And in the early part of 1864, men who I have no hesitation in characterizing as unprincipled detractors made charges against him and had a one-sided investigation of his conduct before that most unfair body, the Committee on the Conduct of the War. I presume you have consulted their document. And if you did, and without more discrimination than anyone not personally acquainted with the battle could make, it would be that the influence of these detractors would reach you. I believe you that you do not intend to act unfairly. I would willingly give you my opinion as to any fact and in relation to other facts if we were together, but I am not prepared to write critically about the war just yet because of too many other occupations. I would only give you one suggestion in writing of the battles, and that is to be very sparing of censure. Nearly all the men in the war tried to do well, and they are entitled to consideration for the effort at least. While as yet it is very imperfectly made known who accomplished the most or made the greatest failures. Particularly should we be lenient on the subject of generalship, for we had a meddlesome administration, invariably so, and often very inexperienced troops, and under officers, both things together making generalship almost impossible. Very respectfully, G.K. Warren. And I thank you for your attention, and if I can answer any questions, I'll be very happy to.
I'm from Mississippi. So I understand the long the controversy pretty well, the context of it. What I'm having a little trouble comprehending is what's that big deal about Sickles coming out and the controversy in the broader context? Because from what I'm understanding here at this conference, it did not end up affecting the battle or the outcome of the battle.
Well, again, what you have to view from that point of view is counterfactual history. What would have happened if Dan Sickles and the Third Corps had stayed back on Sunbury Ridge? And of course, the answer can never be known because it didn't happen. And historians can write all they want about, well, what if this would have happened? What if this would have happened? You can write great books, and somebody's just written a great book about how the Battle of Gettysburg might have turned out differently. But you can't prove it either way. But basically, if you look at the Confederate plans, Lee's reconnaissances didn't work out very well. And he sort of had an idea where the Union Army was. From what I can gather, reading the Confederate accounts, Captain Samuel Johnson, the engineer, who supposedly got all the way to Little Round Top before coming back to report to Lee, Armistead Long's reconnaissance along Cemetery Ridge on the evening of July 1st, and E.P. Alexander checking out about the same terrain early on July 2nd. Some of it revolves around Lafayette and McLaws. Of course, McLaws was Longstreet's probably best division commander. McLaws heads Longstreet's corps coming onto the battlefield, and there's this controversial discussion that Lee and Longstreet and McLaws have at some unidentified point in the battlefield where McLaws is asked to come up and speak to General Lee, who has a map on the ground. And Lee points to this map and says, General McLaws, I want you to put your division here and be prepared to attack the Yankee left flank. And is there anything you know that would prevent you from going there? McLaws says, no, I would like to go out and reconnoiter. And then Longstreet snaps back at him and says, no, you stay with your division, I want to play so. And McLaw says Longstreet pointed to a different spot on the map than General Lee did. And what this all boils down to is when Johnston makes his reconnaissance, he gets up either on Little Round Top or on Helps Ridge in front of Little Round Top. It's early morning, the skies haven't cleared yet. There's lowland fog along creeks. Geary's men either have just left, and Sickles' men haven't taken up position yet. And when they look out from Seminary Ridge, and the Confederate officers there, and they look at the Union lines forming along the ridge, it's my opinion they come under the idea that the Yankee left flank doesn't extend all the way down to Little Round Top. And Lee's plan of battle was the famous attack up the Emmitsburg Road. Now, what does that mean? What he apparently originally decides to tell McLaws is to anchor his left flank on the Emmitsburg Road, extend his division along the Wheatfield Road, and attack parallel with the road into the Union left flank, with Hood coming up parallel to him to crush the Union left flank, while Buell gets the Yankee right flank and crushed between them, with Hill coming up in the middle. And this is where the controversy takes place, because what Sickles says is Longstreet knew about the Round Tops, Longstreet knew this, Longstreet knew this, Lee knew this. Meade didn't understand any of this. Meade was ignorant of the terrain. I moved out to the peach orchard, took up a commanding position in front of the Round Tops, and occupied the high ground so the Confederates couldn't put their artillery there and shut me out. So what Sickles is saying is, I went out and I blunted Longstreet's attack to enable more troops to come up and save the Union left flank. Now, did that happen or didn't? What would have happened? The counter argument to what Sickles says, and what happened if Sickles had obeyed orders and had dug in or whatever and stayed on the ridge? And what that means is if the Confederates had followed Lee's plan, if Longstreet hadn't argued and McLaws came up the Peach Orchard Road, instead of seeing Yankee batteries and troops as far as the eye could see, and having Hood come up behind him and prepare to attack as it happened at 4 p.m. What happens at 4 p.m. when they finally come up, or 3 p.m. when they come up to the Peach Orchard? There's no Yankees there. McLaw simply moves down the Peach Orchard Road, lines up, and attacks. Well, his right flank's in the air. The 3rd Corps can come forward and smash the heck out of Longstreet's Corps. And by that point, the 6th Corps is on the battlefield, and Meade had planned to ship the 5th Corps over and put it behind the left flank. Then you would have had 2 Yankee corps to be able to roll up Longstreet's men. And what Sickles and his supporters didn't know is they really had to study the controversy on the Confederate side to realize, well, gee, if we had stayed put where we were, we could have watched the Confederates marching right across our flank, right across our front. And this is where it's kind of hard to understand, because Longstreet was looking for support. He was being attacked by Early and Pendleton and everybody else in the process. This is the thing I kind of have problems understanding sometimes is Longstreet shows up at the battlefield of Union and sits next to Dan Sickles and tells everybody what a great job Sickles did in running his assault and saving Little Round Top and delaying his march for 40 minutes with Verdun's men. And on the surface, it really doesn't make any sense. But, did I answer your question?
Yeah, sure did.
It's really crazy day in American history trying to make sense of what happened.
Do you find it rather amazing today to experience the revival of Longstreet's reputation that's apparently going on today?
I don't know really how to account for that, except the Civil War scholarly field, and maybe Ed could say something about it. It's undergoing a revisionist battle right now. I'm not really sure how to describe it. In terms of Gettysburg, interest was heightened, with the 125th anniversary. All the big battle reenactments, then Hollywood made the Gettysburg movie and everything, and then that heightened a whole bunch of different controversies. People started arguing about, well, did Chamberlain receive too much credit? How was Longstreet portrayed? How was Lee portrayed? I've seen everybody arguing about the Gettysburg movie, what's right, what's wrong about it. But no, high times in American history, throughout history, people have, they're in an up and down swing. At one time, Thomas Jefferson was a god who couldn't even be touched because he built Monticello, he brought in all sorts of horticulture and agricultural ideas. He was president. He engineered the Louisiana Purchase. He did this, and now look at his reputation now. And what historians are writing down, we'll say, well, he had an affair with Saddam Hussein. He didn't free his own slaves, he didn't do this, he didn't do this. Characters can set themselves up, and Lee had an unblemished reputation, for decade after decade after decade. There's 2 points of view on Lee, that he was the god of the Confederacy, the general who only lost because of overwhelming Yankee numbers, and then now there's people saying, well, Lee wasn't that good of a general, Longstreet should have listened to Longstreet, he should have done this. And I'm really not really sure how, but it's basically, it's a part of just a general trend of history where everybody gets attacked eventually. Find the different interpretations of Pearl Harbor. Did the president know it was coming or not? It's one of those questions that somebody decides to open up, and then other historians look at it and decide, well, I didn't like the way this was written, I'm going to write it from this perspective. And everybody's always looking for something new, a new interpretation, rather than just a rehashing of the same old sources under a different product with pictures in. And so people are looking for something new and something positive, which then self-works. And I think that's part of the answer. I wish I could be more specific, but I can't.
There was a Halleck report to Congress or the President about Gettysburg, and I think in that he said that the Third Corps almost lost a whole day because of their move.
When Halleck wrote his report of the operations, Halleck waited until he had General Meade's report of the campaign. He basically mimicked what the general in command of the field said.
Those words are from Meade, and that
Yeah.
was Meade's feeling.
Yeah, he admitted to me at least, Halleck said on one or 2 occasions that his view of the battle was the importance of the general commanding reported, because other than that, he had no direct information other than what he reported.
I sort of got the impression that report got Sickles' goat more than anything that Meade would know.
Well, if you look at Meade's report, and the quote is basically, he says, on the afternoon of July 2nd, I wrote to the left and finding that General Sickles had misapprehended his orders. Now, to someone with an ego like Dan Sickles, what does misapprehended mean? It means you didn't understand your orders. And Meade said, later, after the war, he said, at the time, I truly believed that Dan Sickles didn't understand what he was supposed to do with his troops. He tried to give Sickles the benefit of the doubt, but then he found since the war that Gary told him this, and other officers given told me this, and then when the committee on the conduct of the war hearings hit, then Meade realized that Sickles actually had disobeyed orders and thought he was doing for the best, but just messed up in the battlefield, and then Sickles had to cover up what he did, by attacking other people. It's the same on the Confederate side. Jubal Early and other officers who didn't perform as well as they should have. Well, let's cover up our mistakes and attack Longstreet. You find another scapegoat, and Sickles did the same thing. Let's throw them off in the command of the general. And same thing results.
Was Sickles historicist?
My guess, if he wasn't, he authorized the report.
Last question.
I've always had the impression that Meade was viewed as slightly less than confident. I'm getting, the more I get into this, the more I'm getting the impression that he was a very confident officer, but his personality was something that is skewed because...
His nickname was the Old Snapping Girl, for good reason. If you read the early accounts of Gettysburg, Meade hills in the rear of the peach orchard. You know, the Confederate artillery's booming in the distance. And you read the early accounts of Gettysburg, you read even stuff in the mid-20th century, is they have a very cordial conversation. Meade tells him, well, sir, I think you've advanced too far, but you won't be able to do that. I'm going to have to bring up the reinforcements. But then you have to dig it a little bit deeper, and you read the accounts of the staff officers of either staff who heard what happened. Meade apparently blew up and used a lot of expletives and told Sickles exactly what he thought of being out there. And Meade was used to doing that. I mean, Meade, you know, what happens in 1864 is during the overland campaign against Richmond, one of the Philadelphia journalists writes that Grant saved Meade's skin. Meade apparently, according to this reporter, had told Grant after the first day of the Battle of Wilderness and out of the draw, after the Wilderness, they should withdraw back across the river and lick the wounds and then come back against Meade again. And of course, Meade probably never said this, and the report got skewed that Grant was the savior and Meade was just a cipher. And so what Meade hears about this, he calls the reporter into his tent and asks him where to get this information. And the reporter kind of, you know, I can just see the reporter kind of probably shuffling his feet and looking at the ground. And there's this extremely angry Pennsylvania officer looking him in the eyes and, where did you get this information? And the officer is saying, well, it was the talk of the camp. And Meade it was the talk of the camp, and blows up and says, I'm going to make an example of you. So he tells Provost Marshal Patrick to get rid of this reporter. So the guy is grabbed, mounted backwards on a mule with a sign put around his neck saying libel to the press, raided through the camp and sent to Washington. And because of that, a number of other reporters banded together and decided they would denigrate the press as much as possible by not mentioning his name. So if you look at New York and Philadelphia papers after about June of 1864, you see dispatches from the front. You never see Meade's name mentioned for quite a while. And it didn't help Meade's reputation, but Meade could blow up when he wanted to. And he does an effective job, actually, controlling the war. It's one of the future projects I'd like to work on is a more balanced, critical biography of General Meade. It's one of those things that would take a number of years because if you go to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, look at General Meade's personal papers, there's this much stuff to start with. In addition to Andrew Humphreys' papers, which take up about this much space, and Gibbons' papers, and a number of other papers just there, and some of the staff officers. It's a major project, but sometime in the future. Yeah.
Just want to add what our distinguished speaker has said. I've been campaigning for 30 years to get a sign changed when you get out of your car at Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park, which says that General Lee on this day surrendered to General Grant and the Army of the Potomac. Meade, by the time they're writing labels, it was written at the time of the 100th anniversary. And the Park Service got through the review process and everything. Meade is completely ignored. And try as hard as you can't get them to change the sign.
No, if you look at the published books on Grant, McFeely's book on Grant, it basically says Grant belittled Meade, used him as a cipher, and kind of shunted him off as well as he could. And of course, Grant, played favorites and everything by bringing Sheridan in and listening to Sheridan after Sheridan sacked Warren for no reason. It fought for it. But